its light on the fourth day, on the Sabbath, the creation on the fourth day of the rotation of the priestly course of Gomar, the sign of Shekinah. In the fourth year, the sign of Gomar. In the second year, in the sign of Shekinah. In the third year, the sign of Gomar. In the sixth year, the sign of Shekinah. In the second, the sign of Gomar. In the fifth, the sign of Shekinah. After the sabbatical, the year, the sign of Gomar. In the fourth, the sign of Shekinah. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Gomar. In the third, the sign of Shekinah. In the sixth, the sign of Gomar. In the second, the sign of Shekinah. In the fifth, the sign of Gomar. After the sabbatical year, in the sign of Shekinah. In the fourth, the sign of Gomar. In the sabbatical year, the sign of conclusion of the second Jubilee, the sign of the second Jubilee, the 17th sign of which 3 signs fall in the sabbatical year, the creation, the sign of Shekinah. In the third year, the sign of Gomar. In the sixth, the sign of Shekinah. In the second, the sign of Gomar. In the fifth, the sign of Shekinah. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Gomar. In the fourth, the sign of Shekinah. In the sabbatical year, in the sign of Gomar. In the third, the sign of Shekinah. In the sixth, the sign of Gomar. In the second, the sign of Shekinah. In the fifth, the sign of Gomar. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Shekinah. In the fourth, the sign of Gomar. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Shekinah. In the third, the sign of Gomar. In the sixth, the sign of Shekinah. In the second, the sign of the conclusion of the third Jubilee, the sign of the third Jubilee, 16 sign of which 2 signs fall in the sabbatical, the third Jubilee, 16 signs of which 2 signs fall in the sabbatical year, a Jubilee of Shekinah. In the second year, the sign of Gomar. In the 15th, the sign of Shekinah. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Gomar. In the fourth, the sign of Shekinah. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Gomar. In the third, the sign of Shekinah. In the sixth, the sign of Gamal. In the second, the sign of Sekna. In the fifth, the sign of Gamal. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna. In the fourth, the sign of Gamal. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna. In the third, sign of Gamal. In the sixth, sign of Sekna. In the second, sign of Gamal. In the fifth, sign of Sekna. After the sabbatical year, sign of conclusion of the fourth Jubilee. Sign of the fourth Jubilee, 17 sign, of which 2 signs fall in a sabbatical year, a Jubilee of Sekna, and the fourth year, the sign of Sekna, and the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal, and the third, the sign of Sekna, and the sixth, the sign of Gamal, and the second, the sign of Sekna, and the fifth, the sign of Gamal. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna, and the fourth, the sign of Gamal. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna, and the third, the sign of Gamal. In the sixth, the sign of Sekna, in the second, the sign of Gamal. In the fifth, the sign of Sekna. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal. In the fourth, the sign of Sekna. In the sabbatical year, the sign of the conclusion of the fifth Jubilee falling during a priestly course of Jahabib, the sign of the fifth Jubilee, 16 sign of which the sign fall in sabbatical year, a Jubilee of Gamal. The third year, the sign of Sekna. In the sixth, the sign of Gamal. The second sign of Sekna. In the fifth, the sign of Gamal. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna. In the fourth, the sign of Gamal. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna. In the third, the sign of Gamal. In the sixth, the sign of Sekna. In the second, the sign of Gamal. In the fifth, the sign of Sekna. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal. In the fourth, the sign of Sekna. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal. In the third, the sign of Sekna. In the sixth, the sign of the conclusion of the sixth Jubilee. The signs of the sixth Jubilee, 16 sign of which 2 signs fall in sabbatical year. And regarding the Jubilee Gamal in the second year, the sign of Sekna. In the fifth, the sign of Gamal. After, in the sabbatical year, the sign of Sekna. In the third, the sign of Gamal. In the sixth, the sign of Sekna. In the second, the sign of Gamal. In the fifth, the sign of Sekna. After the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal. Fourth, sign of Sekna. In the sabbatical year, the sign of Gamal. In the third, the sign Sekna. In the fifth, the sign of conclusion of the seventh Jubilee. The sign of the seventh Jubilee, 16 sign of which 2 signs fall in sabbatical year. Sign of Jubilee the year of the Jubilee, according to the days of and priestly course of Majin the third. All praises to Ahaya Bahashem Yeshaya the Ruach.
Under the shadow of his wings, yeah, I'm hidden, I got courage. Face the persecution, cause I live by every word he said. Plus I'm slaying demons with the sword, they attacking me. What to be submitted, every day I seek the mastery. I'm sticking with the truth. See Babylon fall every minute, and you know they can't explain it. He told us what to do. Guard the visitation in the feast, the commands with your whole heart. You know what Allah here, my shit, I get his right here. We don't know the day or hour. Time slows down for no man. Judgment waves coming in. People gotta get the fury out. Prophetic words, they come to pass. Your bloodline, you don't get it past. Oh no. The weed and tares we sown upon the earth. The righteousness of kings we sown from birth. The black horse from Revelation got the prices up. Famine in the earth, it's time for sacrifices. Get it in blood. Give them devices up, they causing death to your inner man. We know that Mashiach is coming back to gather us to our homeland. Guard the word of my life. Born to be a disciple, yeah. Sword cutting them on sight. Under the shadow of his wings, yeah, I'm hidden, I got courage. Face the persecution, cause I live by every word he said. Plus I'm slaying demons with the sword, they attacking me. What to be submitted, every day I seek the mastery. I'm sticking with the truth. See Babylon fall every minute, and you know they can't explain it. He told us what to do. Guard the visitation in the feast, the commands with your whole heart. Looking fire for the beast. We got no time for the mind games. That's war coming out peace. Broadways for the weak. I'm undeniably identified with the mark of the priest. Yeah, wartime, no apologies. Kingdom coming, some monopoly. The truth is in your face, no, it can't be mistaken. I know they shaking in their boots when they see our nation rise up. Culture is the feast, and the Torah sea is breaking bread. Manna from the heavens, 11 hour, he keep us fed. I'm at the wicked head when it comes to purpose. Plagues to reach the walking dead because they serve the serpent. So soldiers marching in for Yahusha. Dominion, need the power. Under the shadow of his wings, yeah, I'm hidden, I got courage. Face the persecution, cause I live by every word he said. Plus I'm slaying demons with the sword, they attacking me. What to be submitted, every day I seek the mastery. I'm sticking with the truth. See Babylon fall every minute, and you know they can't explain it. He told us what to do. Guard the visitation in the feast, the commands with your whole heart. I got coverage, yeah. So soldiers marching in for you, sure.